Those of you longtime viewers of the channel may remember my 2004 Toyota Prius, but in case you don't, I suggest subscribing because I make informative videos about interesting and weird cars and also some videos about my own cars. But anyway, in case you don't remember my Prius, I'll give you a little refresher. My dad was one of the first people to buy a Toyota Prius back in 2004, and he actually had to travel several miles away to a different Toyota dealership than we had usually gone to because they were so rare and no one drove these things back then. Keep in mind, this was way back in the days when you saw another one of these Priuses on the road, you'd flash the brights because they were so uncommon. But over the years, we've continued owning the car, and the Toyota Prius turned into a massive success. Toyota ended up selling hundreds of thousands of these per year since 2004, and now you see them everywhere on the road. But like so many Priuses, ours has just been quietly in the background, humming along, putting in honest work year after year. In fact, nearly a year ago, I made a video singing my praises of the Toyota Prius, how we had owned it for 18 years and it was still on the original high voltage battery, and it had never left us stranded anywhere. There was only one problem though. Right after I made that video, the high voltage battery started to fail. 3,000 miles from home. Now, this became a bit of a problem, but the car was still drivable, so I continued driving it, and it wasn't such a big deal in more populated areas where if the car ever broke down, I'd be close by to help. However, it started to become a little bit more interesting when I began traversing some of the less populated states. For example, if the hybrid battery started to fail in Wyoming, I'd be closer to the nearest bison shepherd rather than the Toyota dealership. So it was really essential that I made it out of there unscathed. And it did get a little bit dicey coming over some of the mountain passes in Wyoming where this Prius was hovering in the bottom 2 bars of the battery and power was extremely limited. On some of the highway stretches, I had trucks tailgating me going up grades at 40 miles an hour. This was a bit unnerving, but luckily, under the advice of a well-known hybrid shop in Boulder, Colorado, the technicians advised me that it would probably make it home to New Jersey. So I listened to them and drove it several thousand miles back to New Jersey. I eventually did make it home, when I was then faced with the decision of whether or not I should actually go through with replacing the battery on this thing. After all, it was an 18-year-old car with dents and scratches on every body panel and an interior that smells like the rooms at a Motel 6. I then went to my local Toyota dealership where I was quoted $1,900 after I returned the battery core. Now, this initially sounded like a lot of money to me, but then I soon realized that in order to find an equivalent replacement to this car, it would be at least $5,000. And $1,900 isn't even enough money to buy you a rusty Impreza with 300,000 miles and vape oils on the windshield. I then looked back on the 18 years that I've spent with this car, all the memories, all the fun adventures that I had gone on in this car, all the rainy, boring days of driving around town, and I just couldn't let $1,900 stand between me and letting this car go. So it was a no-brainer decision for me to go through with the installation of a new high-voltage battery. It's also worth mentioning that I posted this conundrum in my Toyota Prius Facebook group, and a lot of people suggested I go with an aftermarket battery such as a Green Bean, but there are various other brands that do these kind of refurbished batteries. But it was easy for me to steer clear of this and just spend all the money and go for the OEM battery. I spent a lot of time at repair shops, and I know that going OEM is really the best bet if you want things to work right the first time. Now, it's not a huge deal if you take a chance buying an aftermarket shock absorber and it turns out to be defective. No big deal. You just swap it out. It's $100 that you lost, and you put in an OEM one after all. But when we're talking about a component that's so vital to the performance of the Toyota Prius, like the high voltage battery, you really want to make sure that you're putting in the right product. So it was an easy decision for me to go with the OEM battery and just do it right the first time. I got 18 years out of the old one, so I wanted to get that same longevity out of the new one, and that's why I went with the OEM battery over an aftermarket one. My next challenge was figuring out how to actually install the new battery. Now, despite the relative commonality of this issue, there weren't actually that many resources online, but I used the resources that were available to help guide myself through the beginning processes of the installation. As far as the battery replacement goes, the initial part of the disassembly was pretty easy. All you had to do was just take apart a few interior panels here and remove this whole tray and remove the seat backs. It was basically just a lot of disassembly. Anyone with a wrench could do that. The biggest challenge came when I realized that the new OEM Toyota hybrid battery did not come with an ECU. All the videos I saw online just showed someone removing a few bolts, taking out the old battery and just putting in a fully assembled new battery. But for me, that wasn't the case. When I opened my OEM HV battery, there was a complete piece missing from the side of it. Now, I'm not super well versed in the hybrid world, so I didn't really know what was going on, but it took me a couple minutes to figure out that there is a whole piece, namely the ECU on the old battery, that if you buy an OEM one, you have to swap the old one to the new one. And it turned out to actually be a little bit more complicated than I had anticipated. Swapping the ECU involved following each wire to its appropriate connectors, remembering where they installed, and making sure that they went in the exact right place when you put it on the new battery. And it's very important that they go in the right place because this is an incredibly complex car, and if you accidentally hook one wire up to the wrong connection, then the whole thing could blow up. So I really wanted to make sure that I did this thing perfectly, so I really took my time tracing each wire precisely to the connector, taking pictures at every single angle, and making sure I did it completely right when I put it back in. And there was no bigger relief, probably in my recent history, when I pressed that start button and the car fired right up. I was like, boom! I did it! Even though it's not such a crazy complex repair, it was still a pretty good achievement for me.
Expand.
So let's talk about driving experience. And by the way, sorry about my hair. I look like one of those librarians that yells at you for using the printer because it's 25 cents per page. Exact change only. But anyway, so I'm very happy with how this car drives after the installation of my new hybrid battery. I've put several thousand miles on it since I swapped out the batteries, and the performance has been amazing. The new battery is doing really well. I should also mention previously to replacing the battery, I also cleaned out the battery fan, which helps cool the battery, and this is something really important because a lot of these older Priuses have never had that done. Over time, the fan gets clogged up with a lot of dust that doesn't allow the fan to adequately cool the battery, which could also lead to premature failure. But the car is driving great, the battery stays nice and level, on the monitor it stays in the blue all the time. Power is great merging onto highways, and gas mileage is phenomenal. In and around the city here in Tucson, I'm getting upwards of 45 miles per gallon. If I really, really wanted to and I wanted to hypermile it, I could get 50 all day long. It's not even that hard. I just like to drive with a bit of a heavy foot sometimes. So yeah, I highly recommend, for those of you thinking it might not be worth it to replace the battery in your older second-gen Toyota Prius, I think it's worth reconsidering and, thinking about how much it's going to actually cost to replace this vehicle, and also the fact that it's a second-gen Prius. It's one of the most reliable, best cars on the road, super solid, so once you replace the battery, you should be good to go for several more decades should you service the car regularly. So that's my piece of advice, and that's my experience with replacing the battery on the Toyota Prius. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you for watching. If you would like me to review your cool car here in southern Arizona, I'd be happy to do that. I'm not picky at all with the cars. In fact, I like kind of the cheaper, more interesting cars that not that many people get into reviews about. So let me know if you want me to do that. I'll put my email in the description below. Thanks so much for watching. Peace.